Family Initiative. Today, we are going to talk about what military families deserve: safety, parenting, and the Bill of Rights. We'll go ahead and get into our introduction. I'm Shalina Critchell, like I said, and I am a regional organizer with Secure Families Initiative. We have Brandy Jones, who is our executive organizer with the organizing department with Secure Family Initiative. And we also have Kayla, and Kayla Corbin is the executive director for Operation Child Care. Thank you for joining us. For too long, the unique challenges faced by military families have gone unaddressed. Today, we gather to champion a fundamental truth: military families deserve unwavering safety, complete transparency, and a clearly defined Bill of Rights. This isn't just a wish, it's a critical need, and we're here to explore how to achieve it with our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalina, for kicking us off here. I'd like to also say Shalina is an amazing person, and not only has she been a military spouse, she's also been a military parent. And so I just appreciate you opening us up here at our live. Um, this is really emotional in a way because I feel like this has been years in the making. I know Kayla and I met a few years ago kind of talking about this issue and with her amazing nonprofit working on helping military families and children specifically. We kind of were chatting about these things that we knew to be true in our community that no one was really talking about. And so today, we're here to discuss that military families moved often. We rely on systems meant to support us, but all too often these systems leave us navigating everything alone, especially as military spouses. So today we'll talk about some real stories and some gaps in what we know the Military Family Bill of Rights could look like from a PCS safety and also child care oversight, which Kayla, I'm so excited for you to come today and share all the work you've been working on with this topic as well. Can you hop on and let us know more? What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Goodness, yes. This has been some time in the making. My organization as a whole, well, I'm Kayla Corbett. For those of you who don't know me, as they said, I founded Operation Child Care Project. So we're a national nonprofit dedicated to military families, military and veteran families. We help them navigate child care programs, understand their options, and we develop support systems for them. And in this work over these last few years, especially as we were really succincting in our case management, we kept seeing this recurring theme of families who did experience issues within DoD operated care and were not able to navigate the complexities of the systems in front of them. Mm-hmm. And it became really difficult, right, over time, because everyone works a little bit differently to even start to navigate those for families, which is really where we specialize, is getting to understand programs and how do we break it down for family understanding. And that was just, it's been very complex, and we've had to really rely on families as the experts in these. So I'm eager to jump in and kind of talk more about it and how we all align.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kayla. And for me, I guess I'll start by talking about here at SFI as the organizing director, what I started to notice over the last few years as we were meeting with families, talking with families, specifically our families of color, through our military family caucuses of color, which are our AAPI families, our Black families, our Hispanic families, and our Native American Indigenous families. Like what I got to hear, like as a shared experience, no matter what group you were in, was that there was a concern overall for safety and a complete lack of information for families when it especially pertained to PCSing. And so we know that our families of color, like we like to say, our military is diverse because we are a very diverse community. But when we are asked to PCS, that's when it gets very complicated for our families of color, because we can find ourselves being only one of our culture on an entire installation, in an entire area, maybe even of the town of the area that you're being PCS to. I know that's happened for myself, our family, when we moved to the area, like Yuma, Arizona area. Also, when we lived in Orange County, California, like these places for our family, we're being, for myself being a family who is Black, 1% of the population in Yuma, Arizona is Black. 1% of the population in Orange County is Black. And so like going there, trying to find like culture, trying to find things that was information that was vital for our family because our needs may look a little different, was very difficult. And so as we started hearing from more families over the years, I was able to kind of gauge that if there's a safety issue, what's the best way to address that? And of course, we always think of legislation here at SFI. We like to say, when our families are sharing their stories, we're hoping that this is the last time you ever have to share your story, because we do realize how traumatic that is. And we know that what does that look like? It has to be through legislation, because when we change the laws and policies, that's where we see our families, the most impact happening for our families, as far as not having to relive some of the things that we've gone through. I know, like for Shalina, who has served, for myself, I'm a spouse of 20 years now, is also a military child. I know Shalina was a spouse of close to decades as well, and a parent as well. So like I know Kayla as well. So like seeing this from all the angles, it was like really great to reach out to you, Kayla, and kind of say like, what are you hearing on your end, like with families who have young ones, little ones? And I have a special interest to me because if we're coming to nonprofit, I taught the little ones in kindergarten, and this hearing like, what are they saying is happening? And the stories I heard back from you as well were just like, oh no, it was very heartbreaking and surprising.
I think the surprise is mutual among everyone I talk to about this topic. When we do see military families PCS, childcare is very quickly becoming one of the very first things that they pursue. We used to see families look for housing around school districts, but now, because childcare has become even more scarce, they're actually seeking housing around childcare options. But what a lot of families don't know, especially our families who are more likely to live on the installation, less likely to be able to afford care off the installation, is they don't know that the DoD programs, the Department of Defense programs, through the child development centers, and now we're seeing states. This happened as well with our family childcare homes. So the ones that are still DoD operated and licensed, that they operate under a self-policing structure, which means that the same agency providing the care is also the one investigating any safety concerns. And as this is becoming more surprising to individuals, I mean, I think that you could Google, unfortunately, and see recent news cases that have been hitting all the headlines about different abuse and neglect within military operated care. And I think it's important to note, though, that all childcare comes with risks. This is not exclusive to the DoD. But what differs across those settings is how those risks have been mitigated. And I think that this is where we really align with your PCS safety initiative, is because if you were not moving, if you were leveraging non-DoD operated care, there are layers of independent oversight within community-based care. You have state licensing agencies, you have health departments, you have third-party investigators, and they all really work together to ensure accountability. But the contrast there being DoD operated care lacks that external review. And families are the ones who unfortunately do not find out until they need it. And then they are solely responsible for pursuing that.
Kayla, yes. I mean, that when we first connected and like talking through that and what those missing layers were, like I said, coming from the education background, knowing I had to be a mandatory reporter, there are things that I had to follow to be in the classroom with children, background tests that I was subjected to as I should be, working with little ones, and then just coming on the military side of the house, like having our children attend the center, like the lack of those same types of safety measures. It's very surprising. Again, keeping that within the system, within the federal side, within the installation, and under the command of that installation's like kind of like what they decide is best. And so I think that families don't have an idea of that. And like you talked about that's kind of where the PCS safety campaign originated, when I heard about 9 families through one of our secretaries of our branches of service chatting at an event and sharing that these 9 families, who were mostly those who were Black families, had to leave an area because their children were being racial ethnically bullied. And at that point, it was so bad that there was nothing but just leaving the area that felt like it could suffice the situation. And I was just so surprised. Thinking of the historical context of like the Little Rock Nine, what that looked like then when we heard of 9 families, and then it was like they were told to allow the children to be there who were Black and to be treated equally, and demanded that equality. But to hear that all these years later that went a different way, and specifically for military children's families who were stationed in the area, it's really what set off this PCS safety campaign, which now this year we did have a win in the NDAA 2025, asking for the branches of service to speak to HASC and SASC and report back concerning which branches had reassignments because of compassionate reassignments, and why they were reassigned those families, as well as like data of how many families that was per branch and how over the last 3 years. There was also an ask in the NDAA report for each branch of service to talk to HASC and SASC about ways that families can address safety issues per branch when you do feel unsafe, when you are stationed somewhere. As to date, we've only heard back from one branch, being the Army, which is we find really disappointing. I know for myself, I'm a Marine Corps spouse. I know Shalina's connections are also to Marine Corps. So we found that disappointing that we haven't heard from all branches. Like, when we're asked to do our PCSing or asked to provide information, we do it diligently, and it felt disheartening that that wasn't abided by when those branches were asked by the Congress and Senate this year. So we still have faith that that could happen. But I will say, from that work, we came up knowing, having all these different experiences from families, that we needed to do more legislation. And so we were able to kick off our Military Family Bill of Rights this year. We were able to take members through a fly-in to the Hill to meet with their representatives who are active duty military serving families, veteran families, to share their experiences. And so from that, I think we finished up in March of the fly-in. We do hear that we have some language possibly that might have made it into some type of a draft. And so we're very excited about that, because we always like our families to feel like their storytelling is for policy and that things will change. We did recently hear about, 4 weeks after our fly-in, that military families PCSing will be stopped by half from the Department of Defense. So we definitely take that as a win of our families sharing their stories, sharing their experiencing of how much PCSing has affected their families. And so for me, again, being a military child myself, I never thought I would see the day when families could say, maybe we don't have to move so much. So it was a very big deal in our community. And we heard a lot of feedback from our community on that order as well. So yeah, I think moving forward, as we kind of see what happens with the legislation, like Kayla, I know I'd love for you to share more too, but I know our goal here for our organizations is to really say to you all out there listening, who are our families who are currently serving, I want you to be informed. I know that I did not feel I had that same information when I had little ones at school or living on the base. I was not informed that I'm entering a federal installation, and because of that, the rules are a little different when we cross this line. I had no knowledge. And so definitely one of the goals here today is kind of starting that conversation with our community to say, like, hey, totally ask questions. It's perfectly legitimate to say, what's the difference if the school's on the base? What's a DODEA school versus a school that's not a DODEA school? What are my rights? What information should I be privy to? Yeah, Kayla, what else would you totally add? I know
so many things.
Yeah.
And so we started kind of formulating some questions. I love that you're talking about this, and yes, the legislation piece, it's where it's going to have to go. But also, I think a really important point that you hit on, and this is at the core values of our organization, is that we operate with our only stakeholders in mind, and that is the families. So we do not want to create something that is not directly informed by the families that we're serving. And we've been working on this for about 2 years now. And so it's not quite to the finish line, but we are getting very close. And what I will say is what we started with, which is where I thought the issues were before really hearing from all of these different families, is not exactly where we landed. It is far more nuanced. There were far more gray areas that no one really knew existed. And so we came up with a few questions. We have some proposed points that we are, again, still working on. And then we have questions that people can ask when they do go enroll to get this information, because I also think it's not enough to ask. It's also say, can I find this in policy somewhere? Can you point to me where this is? As military families, because we do not have a lot of bandwidth, because we PCS so much and we have to rebuild, we frequently just take the answers that we're given and assume this must be what is accurate. And so I think asking for that policy piece right afterwards, even if you don't need it right then, you always want to be prepared before an emergency happens, not during, right? So I think that that's important. I can kind of talk a little bit about a couple of points, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Thank you.
Yes. So we have kind of a list, but these are just a few of the proposed rights that we really do think the family should have, but they currently do not. And until they're codified, unfortunately, the responsibility for understanding this system and ensuring transparency falls unfairly on the shoulders of parents.
Yeah.
One is the right to pre-enrollment education. And so what this means is that families should be clearly informed before enrolling in DoD childcare programs, because they currently are not told at enrollment that DoD programs are responsible for investigating their own incidents. They're also responsible for reporting their own incidents. And when they do report them, they report them to their own chains. The overall independent reporting and review options are just incredibly limited. A lot of MOUs have gone into place. And then as we are now seeing, the Defense State Liaisons are working on state by state right now, is for FCCs removing the requirement to also be licensed by the state. And while that does add some cumbersome measures, right? Because the DoD license and certifies itself, they license and certify the FCCs. And the state was a third-party level of oversight. But in many states, they've passed that legislation saying that now if they only watch military children, they don't need to be licensed, inspected, and with that oversight. And so it really does remove that level. And when families do have a concern, they have very few enforceable rights, and even less that are really in policy. Something that really struck me as shocking in talking to some of these families is the few who were able to access footage from various incidents. If they saw other children who may have been undergoing abuse, neglect, whatever, while they were looking for their own child, there was no way to inform those other parents. Wow. And they wouldn't tell them who the parents were under this like privacy concern. But the only reason they knew that the abuse was happening was because they saw marks on their own child and then went through the very cumbersome process of requesting that footage. So the ability for families to be clearly informed before enrolling that this is, for all intents and purposes, a self-policing entity. And secondarily, understanding the system, which is another proposed point. They do not, most parents, I would venture to say the vast majority, do not receive a clear explanation on how oversight and investigations work within military operated care. And I would venture to say that even I don't have a wonderful understanding of that. You know, we've been, many families have shared with us their own investigations, the documents, who got involved, who didn't get involved, the channels it went through, where it got stuck. And that has really helped us inform this piece, because what we learned is it's going to vary, not just branch to branch, but state to state, installation to installation, depending on if it's a joint installation. Well, now you have even more entities involved. And it really does fall onto families here as well, where families have to request an explanation of the oversight structure, preferably before they need it, so that it is willingly given. Ask for names and the roles of people responsible for the childcare safety, and seek out who to contact if you've been dismissed. We have, unfortunately, as many news stories as you see even more that says that they were unreported. And it's not till it gets into the hundreds that it hits the news. And they say, as it turns out, there were, 200 incidents, 300 incidents. And families don't know, who do they go to if they're dismissed, if they're told, that didn't happen, or don't worry, we move that person to another location. Who do they go to ensure that they do have access to stuff like that? And I'm certain that, as I've seen you working in this PCS safety and with this military bill of rights, that is also a piece that you guys are really pushing for.
Kayla, thank you for sharing this. I'm really taking it in again. I know we've talked about it, but it still doesn't become any less shocking, saying it out loud, hearing it out loud. But yes, absolutely. In our military bill of rights, we have 12 different pieces of legislation underneath of that, where we're asking for information for our families ahead of PCSing. We're asking that our families have some of the things that our counterpart civilians have, like family leave. Our service members do not have leave for any kind of family emergency. It's up to their command to decide if they are able to go to an event that has occurred. And it's also a matter of if they have those days of leave or not. And so it's not something that people are really aware of. And for even us in our community and like you said, interviewing and hearing from people within our membership, it was still, even though I've been a spouse a long time, it's still very shocking, because all I knew when my spouse was deployed to Iraq for the second time was I better not get hit. I better not I better make sure every day I'm here, because I was the plan for the remain behind. It was totally me. Why is that? I never really understood that or thought about it. And thinking about it from a personal perspective, it was really challenging, realizing oh, there's a program called Family Leave that happens for people who are not military. And that's sort of if something were to happen to your spouse, they have a sickness or illness, or so that you can be there, because you also took an oath to that person as well, not just the military. And so I know, Shalina, if you, I know you have some stories affiliated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about on an installation, but what if you're not on installation? When you have recruiting duty, my family experienced that when we got orders to Birmingham, Alabama, and we lived in a regular community. We didn't live on base, and we bought a home at the time. I had to put 2 small children into daycare without knowing the area, without knowing the community. And to this day, my kids they still remember that child care center. They didn't have a good experience. We didn't have a military community. We were literally in civilian life world, all of that. So for me, this is there was no transparency. If I would have known there wasn't a military community or even a base that was an option that I could take my kid to a child care center, I would have made different choices then. So transparency and safety is a really, really big concern for me with military families as well.
Thank you.
And when we're on that, honestly, it ties perfectly into the third and final, really, I wanted to talk on this, and that is that right to informed decision making. If you do not have all the information, you cannot make an informed decision, and that is an issue within the current DoD structure, that for the most part, you have some of that independent oversight. It varies state by state. When it does come to community-based care, probably maybe not at that time. Some states have just started making their inspections public. But I actually just right before I hopped on this call, there was a family who was going to enroll in a center that was listed as accepting the military fee assistance. And then after they jumped in, they got a spot for their child. Amazing. They went on to the state website just to check out their licensing. And just this last month, there was an incident of abuse that was reported. And so it lists out the abuse, what happened, who was interviewed, what the next steps are, the dates. None of that is available for any DoD operated care. So families going into DoD operated care, you do not get to know what is the history of allegations, whether they're founded or unfounded. Most states still publish those for state licensing. They say, what the allegation was, when the inspection happened, what mitigation factors may have been put into place. And none of that exists for DoD operated care. There's no database you can go to see, was there recent incidences of abuse? Was it taken care of? Was someone charged? Like, what happened with these? And that is especially true when we start looking at those FCCs, because the DoD inspects those as well. And so now you have people who are coming in and out. Historically, it was military spouses who operated those. But as we're seeing these policies change and this legislation changed, if you are in one of those states where it's already changed, you don't have to be military affiliated. You can say, yeah, I will only watch military children. And then your only oversight is military. And so no one gets to know, like, what was the possible history? If you were in a different state, did it follow you? You know, it's really scary for families out there. And we want to validate that while also trying to give them some tools on how do they make sure that their child is safe in the situation that they're in at the time.
Thank you so much, Kayla, for what you're doing. And I would like to just take a second too, as we're talking through this, to say all the families who've reached out to us are both organizations to share their story. Like, thank you, because we know that you are very courageous for doing this. We know that you're doing this at a time where you aren't hearing anybody talk like this. So maybe you're wondering if it's just you, if it's something you missed. So I hope that this helps to inform you all and helps you to say, wait a minute, this isn't just something that happened to me, so that's really our goal here today too, is like, as you're hearing us share these stories, if it's starting to feel like I have a story that I was relating, I hadn't thought about it this way, please know that you can reach out to either one of our organizations as we continue this push, which is, it's kind of a long-term game in some ways to make sure that these issues are addressed through policy. But your stories and your voices are, like Kayla said, are what informs those decisions. And it's so important. Like, you are the expert. It's so important that you feel like you have a place in our community, which is our organizations, to come to with these issues. I would say when it comes to our Military Bill of Rights, a lot of the things under there are about, like, crime. Like, we like to say, we know that crime does occur on the base, that we're not absolved from that. We know that there are military policing that happens on our installations, yet unlike in the civilian world that you get the next day in the newspaper, like, printed out, like, here's what happened in your community.
Blotter. Yes.
A blotter. We don't have access to that on the base. Okay, so why is that important? Because a lot of people will say, and I know Kayla brought this up a little bit earlier, that you know what you signed up for. That's kind of what we hear a lot from people who are interfacing with military. But the truth is, we do not, because we have no information. It's very hard to know anything about what you're expected to do or what could happen when you don't have access to information to make informed decisions. And so we don't have access to the crime report on our installations as military families who are asked to live on the installations. And why that's important, because they're also being told that there aren't any availabilities at our child care centers that are there for us. So then we need to rely on our community. We need to rely on a neighbor. We don't know our neighbor. And that's not meant to, like, say that in a way like accusation of anyone, but we don't have access to information that we would need to make safe decisions for ourselves and our children. And so we're asking in our Bill of Rights for access to this information so that we can make informed decisions, so that we do have more knowledge of what it is that we are involving ourselves in and our children, especially when the person that a lot of us depend on for safety, which is our spouse, most of the time, is usually gone when we arrive to installation, whether that's a deployment overseas or working a very what would we all say about this job? It doesn't really have hours. There's no hours. It could be any time that they're unavailable. So it leaves us a lot of the time by ourselves. And we talk about that in our community, having isolation and loneliness. But there's also a part that we don't talk about, and that is then the lack of then safety from having that person who we know defends our nation, defends our Constitution, and has taken the stand of a very courageous stance to do, but a lot of times aren't able to protect our own families and our own spouses and children because of that commitment. And so we really are relying on our community to share your stories. And we're really relying on our members who are in decision-making seats to hear and to try and get a more holistic, organic way of approaching these situations where we can feel safe in our community, protected. And when we're asked to PCS, that we have the information that we need to make that decision for our families. So yeah, I just really appreciate you mentioning your different legislation draft ideas for what you're working on, Kayla. And then here at SFI, like, we've got a petition out. If you would like to sign the petition, we would encourage that. Just knowing that the goal here is please reach out. Do not feel alone in these situations. It doesn't matter how long you've been a spouse we're here to listen. We're here to help. We are advocates in our community, and we're also members of the community. So we're very well informed on the issues that happen because of that. So I just really appreciate everyone tuning in, and I appreciate you, Kayla, for being so thorough and so passionate in your work, especially for children. It's really, it makes me feel like optimistic that we can help get this issue pushed out into our community. And I know you and I, as organizers, and we hold a lot of these stories, and so it does give me a lot of optimism. Like, just kind of say out loud, please, if this is happening to you, please let us all work together. We don't want this to continue happening in our community. Everyone here has dedicated their lives to defending our nation, and our families have as well, are serving. And we want to make sure that, you have humanity, you have dignity, you have safety. These are some things that you should automatically have. And we want to make sure that we're here to help if there's things that are not lining up for your families.
Yeah, and I concur on all of those. I do have optimism, actually. I think that families are becoming better informed. There's not always a perfect solution for any situation that we're in, but we push through anyway. That's why I say, military spouses are relentless because we find a path regardless. It just really helps when there is information. So to really piggyback on yours, any stories. We would not, as an organization, have gotten as far as we have in developing this without the information from families and their lived experience. And we hear from a lot of families who aren't even in the military anymore. Maybe they retired within the last 5 years, and they said, this did happen to us too. But I don't want it to happen to other families. I want this to be stopped. And they reach out and share their stories. So if there is any listeners who have had the unfortunate, unnecessary experiences within any of these DoD operated centers or avenues, and you don't feel like your safety concerns were addressed, or there were still barriers to justice for your family, we do want to hear from you. We are, of course, working on what language should look like to ensure the families are protected and they're informed and they're empowered. And so we have an interest form, and I know that you put it up there. Families can reach out at any time. We are also offering a confidentiality agreement. It does not stop you from telling your story. That just says we will not tell your story. We are just going to use information that only the information we need. We are not trying to re-traumatize everyone through what is clearly a very sensitive and hard topic. Just the information that we need on what barriers did you face, so that as we are working on this language, this policy, who needs to be involved, we do it in a trauma-informed way and in a way that will create real impact for families, because it was designed by families. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Kayla. And thank you so much, Shalina, for kicking us off. Please, we hope to hear from our community. And thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you.